As you just saw here on New York One, a solemn ceremony on a rainy, windswept day to remember those who died 8 years ago on this date in the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. Our Roger Clark joins us from Lower Manhattan now with a look back at some somber moments and thoughts. Roger.
Yeah, Vivian, no doubt about it. As always, a very moving ceremony this morning at Zuccotti Park, which is located right across the street from the World Trade Center site. It all got started a little bit earlier, around 8:40 this morning, and then at 8:46 a.m. the bells tolled as marking when the first plane hit one of the towers on that day. Now, the ceremony, of course, featuring the reading of the names of the 2,752 people who were killed on that day at the World Trade Center. The names read this year by family members, along with volunteers, that to pay tribute to September 11th being designated by the federal government as a national day of service and remembrance. Of course, there also were a number of officials on hand, including readings from the governor, Governor Patterson, former Mayor Giuliani, Mayor Bloomberg, New Jersey Governor John Corzine, and also the Vice President, Joe Biden.
In our joys and in our sorrows, we know we belong to one another. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine, wrote the poet Mary Oliver. Meanwhile, the world goes on.
We have come together to commemorate this anniversary. And just as our hearts return to those that we lost, we also remember all those who spontaneously rushed forward to help, however and whomever they could. Their compassion and selfless acts are etched in our city's history.
Now, in addition to the ceremony, the family members are permitted to head down to the World Trade Center site. And actually, for the first time, they'll be able to stand where the Memorial Plaza will be. That is expected to be complete on the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2011. They were able to go down there, lay flowers, say a prayer, and remember their lost loved ones. So once again, a very solemn ceremony today, remembering this 8th anniversary of the terrorist attacks, and getting a chance to speak to some victims' family members. One thing that they all had to say, each as every year goes by, it still really doesn't get any easier, but ceremonies like this provide a little bit of comfort for them as they continue to heal from this tragedy. That's a story from here in Lower Manhattan. I'm Roger Clark. Vivian, let's head back to you in the studio.
8 years after the terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the city and nation pay tribute to those who died. Our Roger Clark joins us from Lower Manhattan now with more on the solemn ceremony today. Hi, Roger.
Vivian, and I'll tell you, it was a rain-soaked ceremony that certainly added to the somber atmosphere here as we look back on 8 years since the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center. And the ceremony got started 8:40 a.m. this morning, but the first moment of silence coming at 8:46 a.m. That's the time when the first plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Now, as the ceremony continued, as in past years, it was held at Zuccotti Park, which is right across the street from the World Trade Center site. And, of course, the names of 2,752 victims from September 11th at the World Trade Center were read. This year, they were read by pairs of a family member and people who volunteer at various places around the city, all part of a tribute to the fact that that the federal government designated this day now, September 11th, as a national day of service and remembrance. Also, there were readings from various elected officials from New Jersey, Governor John Corzine; from here in New York, Governor Patterson, Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Giuliani, and also here was Vice President Joe Biden.
In our joys and in our sorrows, we know we belong to one another. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine, wrote the poet Mary Oliver. Meanwhile, the world goes on.
we have come together to commemorate this anniversary.
This evening, there will be another familiar sight, the tribute in light, which will
Good evening, I'm Louis Dodley.
And I'm Elizabeth Caledon. The ringing of bells, the reading of names, taps, and tears.
On this 8th anniversary of the terrorist attacks, the city and the country pause once again to remember the 2,750 men, women, and children who died that day.
New York One's Roger Clark went to the World Trade Center site this morning for the solemn ceremony.
The sound of a bell marking the moment a plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The beginning of a chain of events that would change the city, the nation, and the world forever.
Coming here sometimes brings you a little sense of peace, but it still doesn't get like that much easier.
Elsie Caldwell was among those remembering loved ones who perished during the terrorist attacks 8 years ago. The rain-soaked ceremony was again held at Zuccotti Park, across the street from where the Twin Towers once stood.
Maria Rose Abad.
Andrew Anthony Abate.
As in past ceremonies, the name of each victim was read, this year by family members paired with representatives of volunteer organizations around the city, a tribute to the federal designation of September 11th as a National Day of Service and Remembrance. Elected officials delivering readings included Mayor Bloomberg, Governor Patterson, former Mayor Giuliani, and Vice President Joe Biden.
In our joys and in our sorrows, we know we belong to one another. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine, wrote the poet Mary Oliver. Meanwhile, the world goes on.
A song by Carly Simon was among the musical selections. Afterwards, family members made their way to the Trade Center site. This was the first year they could not go down into the pit, to the bedrock at the site. The construction made that impossible. Instead, they gathered in the area where the Memorial Plaza is being built. Sahodra Jagdahari lost a niece and nephew in the tower. She says being there brought some comfort during a difficult time.
It's like maybe a little closeness. I don't know, since we didn't find any remains, maybe it brings a little closeness.
Gina Marie DeSantis lost her cousin and godfather, Terry Gazani. Her message 8 years after the disaster?
I hope nobody forgets, because we have to suffer every day. We have to live with it, that he'll never walk through the door again. So I hope people really remember what we went through as New Yorkers.
For many, the pain is still there. One woman said that the last happy day she had was September 10th, 2001, the day before the attacks, the last time she spoke to her son. In Manhattan, Roger Clark, New York One.